Hi, everyone. Really great to see everybody here. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shawn White. I am the Watershed Forestry Partnership Coordinator as of December of last year. I follow Allison Adams, who had this position before, and you might have known her. The Watershed Forestry Partnership is a group of people that you are now a part of, whether you know it or not. So anyone who works in either Vermont or the Lake Champlain Basin program, who does either riparian restoration work, grows trees, plants trees, funds planting projects. So all the people who are involved some way or another in promoting forest restoration for the purposes of improving water quality and habitat and flood resilience. Welcome everyone. I'm really glad to see you here. This is the first time we've met together since I believe 2019, and I think we didn't meet at all in 2020. And then met virtually in 2021 and 2022. So this is the first time we've all gotten together again. So really, really great to see everyone here. Just can't imagine a better group of people. I mean, you guys are all such good people doing such great work. It's really fun to be gathering everyone together again here. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So UVM is located on land which served as a site of meeting and exchange among indigenous peoples for thousands of years and is home to the Western Abenaki people. University of Vermont honors, recognizes, and respects these peoples, especially the Abenaki, as being the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on where we gather today. In that spirit, we will begin by acknowledging that we are guests on this land, and we renew our commitment to respect and protect the land where we find ourselves today. This is the first time that I've ever organized a conference, so I hope you'll be patient with me. Thank you. You've been all very patient with some of the glitches that have, for registration and, last-minute changes in the agenda, and I appreciate that. And so I hope that you'll continue that, being patient if there's any other glitches to happen today. But I'm sure everything will go fine. The meeting is being recorded, so just so you know, when if you're asking questions or standing up, that your voice at least will be recorded. There's also a photographer who will be taking pictures, so just so that you're aware. And if you would take a look at the agenda, I think the wonderful AmeriCorps members who were checking you in probably mentioned this, but I just want to reiterate that if anyone's going on the field trip, they need to cut their lunch a little bit short. So the field trip will be leaving at 1 o'clock. There's a bus that will be waiting for you at the Davis Circle in the front, and so you'll need to be down there to load up the bus. That field trip is with Audubon, Vermont. They will be leading a group that will, two groups that will split up, and we'll look at how to assess lands, forests, whatever, for bird habitat. And do a little bit of talking about, how you go about restoring riparian buffers specifically for birds. There are still, I think, about 20 spots on that field trip. So if you're interested, you need to sign up at the registration desk. For those of you who stay here and don't go on the field trip, we'll be having the nursery roundtable discussion during that time that everyone else is at the field trip. And if you don't want to do either one, the Chittenden room is going to be open if you want to just hang out and hobnob with people or do work or whatever. I do ask, if you at all can, stay till the end. The last session is going to be a roundtable discussion that will help me know where everyone wants this partnership to go, where we want to put our efforts in terms of improving the outcomes of our projects, whether there's funding considerations, education needed, professional development, anything like that. If you bring your ideas and also just a list of challenges that you are dealing with as you do your work, that we can sort of talk about that and figure out where I can put my efforts and where as a partnership we can start to try to do our best to bring this partnership together again and decide where we want it to go. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is everyone got an index card when you came in, I think. And what that is for is we're going to have a little quiz. And so it's a twig ID quiz. And but I promise that you will all get 100% on it if you want to. So if you get all of the answers right and your card gets drawn at a raffle at the end of the day, you get a pair of really cool high-end Velcro pruners. If you don't really want the pruners and would prefer to have a winter tree finder ID book, then you should get at least one answer wrong, okay? That will indicate to us that you need this. So if you want the pruners, get them all right. If you want the winter tree ID book, get at least one answer wrong. So it'll go like this. I will show you a twig, and if you want to show your prowess in terms of winter tree ID, you can write down the name of that species under number 1 on your index card. Or you can wait until I give you the multiple choice, those options. So this is either American basswood, balsam fir, Begonia Darth Vaderiana, which is actually really a name for a real plant, or reed canary grass. So you get to choose, you can write down the name or the letter, whatever you would like. So you see how this is going to go. And so you will all get 100% if you want the pruners. Okay. So first up we have Phil Wilson. He's going to talk about the CREP program. So whenever we do these planting projects, for those of you who are planting organization people, you know that one of the first considerations is whether the site is in agriculture, is currently used as agricultural land. And if that's the case, then we have to consider whether CREP, Conservation Program Enhancement, no, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program money is. I was talking to somebody else this morning about how the acronyms get so ingrained that I forget what they mean. But anyway, so that's the first consideration is if land is in ag, then we need to consider whether CREP funding it makes sense or not. And we need to bring in the folks that manage the CREP programs in terms of talking to the landowner about that as a possibility. So Phil, if you want to come on up, we'll learn about CREP.
Okay, so I'm here today to talk about the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CREP. So my colleague Ben Gabos, who many of you are probably familiar with, couldn't make it today. But this program is a joint partnership between the Agency of Agriculture, who I work for, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. So just a little overview. As I mentioned, this is a joint state and federal program. It provides financial compensation to landowners for moving agricultural land from production to plant to riparian buffers. So the key there is it needs to be in some kind of agricultural land use, which is fairly common in Vermont, but not always the case. And some of the benefits of the program is we can cover buffer implementation costs at 100% of the cost. We can do invasive control and pre-planting site preparation, which is a key benefit. We can also install on livestock farms, livestock grazing practices like a fence or pipeline, water tubs, other things necessary to make the buffer function. And because we have dedicated full-time staff for the program, we can provide follow-up and often site stewardship. So the program began in technically 2001, fiscal year 2002. And we developed 15-year contract agreements. It's a USDA program between the landowner and the Farm Service Agency. And so as part of that financial component, both the Farm Service Agency and the state of Vermont, the Agency of Agriculture provides upfront money for landowners to enroll. And then FSA provides annual rent every year for 15 years of that contract agreement. And then the Farm Service Agency and the Partnership for Fish and Wildlife provide the implementation costs to do the implementation of the practices. So that's a very high level overview. So I just have a couple slides on some examples of what we're doing and the available practices. So today we're here to talk about riparian forested buffers, but we can do other things like grass filter strips or grass waterways. We can also do wetland restoration, although we've never done it under this program. So now some examples. So we have this happy little stream here in Plainfield. This is a project we're working on, could become a project. And in this case, the outreach was done by the Conservation District, the Winooski Conservation District. So here is a photo of myself and our district partners here out on the property. So now I want to go through some of the benefits. I'm sure you guys are familiar with other riparian buffer funding sources. I want to go through some of the differences between our program and some of the other programs that are out there. So this is a mock-up on I guess your right of what we've proposed out there. On this property, he's currently grazing this land, so it's pasture, it's eligible for the program. And generally, after we walk the property with the landowner, develop a proposal, one of the selling benefits of the program is we can provide some compensation to the landowner. So this is just an example of this potential project. It can be a fair amount of money to the landowner. This is 9.27 acres, and we're looking at over almost $4,000 of upfront incentive money for the landowner to sign up. Just a different example. This one's cropland. So we have different rates for our pasture and our hayland buffers versus our cropland buffers. If it's coming out of annual cropland, it can be a significant amount additional money based on the value of that cropland. So just something to keep in mind, especially when pitching buffers on agricultural lands, there can be a fair amount of compensation that can come with participating in CREP versus another program. And as I mentioned, we can also cover some of these grazing practices, which may be necessary if we're going to get the cows out of the stream. Just some examples: pipeline, water tubs. You guys are very familiar with that. We can cover the cost of building fences and stream crossings. As I mentioned before, we have some amount of budget for invasive control work as part of the program, which is also very helpful. A lot of these older buffers we visit have a lot of invasive species in them that weren't controlled in the beginning. So just some pictures: multiflora rose we see, some parts of the state, Japanese knotweed, and common buckthorn. So another potential benefit is we can control the invasives on the site before they take over, before we do the planting. We also have funding for stewardship or follow-up. Usually with every planting, we either weed whack around the trees after we plant them, or we spray herbicide around the trees to kill the grass, to give the trees leg up for the first year. So this is just an example on a project of some trees we sprayed around. It's very, it's very helpful. And also through our partnership with Partnership Fish and Wildlife, we can often do pre-planting site preparation. So in this case, here's Katie in her UTV. These are different project sites, but you can see after, this is the next season, all that grass is, dead. It's a great planting medium. Another project where we sprayed strips in advance, so we're going to come in the next year and plant trees into these rows. Also very helpful. Here's a great photo from, these are mostly our agency staff on a team building day where we cut a bunch of willow stakes. Not that we're going to do this on all of our projects, but we have full-time staff on the program. So we have some funding for follow-up through the 15-year contract periods. We come back to the projects, try and improve them if possible. Sometimes we can find funding for stewardship. We also just have, with our staff, many years of experience working on riparian buffer site preparation. And we have the capacity to take on larger projects. We do have some projects that are 10, 15, 20 acres that we complete. So one other common question is who plants our buffers? Sometimes landowners themselves will plant buffers, usually on the smaller side. But we also, the program provides funding for the landowner to hire somebody. So oftentimes it's a private forestry contractor, environmental nonprofits. So I'm sure you guys are aware of some of these people. Conservation districts or watershed groups we've worked with to plant buffers. And really anyone the landowner chooses to hire. This is my last slide here. Contact information for myself and Ben Gabos. And a quote, a wise person once said, we do it for the turtles. So if there's time, I can take questions or.
I'm going to have you. Is this working? Okay.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. One was if you can define the Farm Service Agency and tell me what that is, because I'm unfamiliar with it. And then the second is regarding the, sort of the definition of if a property is currently in agriculture, if it hasn't been hayed in, say, 2 years, is that still sort of in that realm? And what are the requirements or recommended practices for checking with CREP before you went to, say, a different funding source for a buffer planting?
Sure. So the Farm Service Agency is a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They provide, Eileen Powers is here. She can speak more to what they do, but they provide programs to farmers just like the Natural Resources Conservation Service does, although they're more focused on insurance and subsidy payment. Maybe I shouldn't say subsidy payments, but other risk management programs as opposed to conservation programs. So the question about is a field that was hayed 2 years ago eligible? We would probably say yes. I don't think that's clearly defined in the handbook, in the programmatic handbook of how recent. That's fairly recent. So it cannot be fallow land, but 2 years ago would be. And then when you should check in whether it's eligible for CREP or not. I mean, ideally, for the landowner, I would, I guess at some point projects get so small that it may not be. Most of the payments are on a per acre basis, so it adds up as you go. So a very small project may not be worth the time, but I would check in with us if you could, because it's a maybe a better deal for the landowner. So. I don't know how much time we have. We can touch base.
Yeah, you mentioned invasive species. I'm wondering, some of those species take like 3 to 5 years to successfully control. Can the program fund an approach like that? And if so, does the landowner receive rental payments for that portion of the work when they're also not able to use the land?
Sure. So, yeah, that's a good question. There are projects that the invasives are too extensive that we don't feel like we can tackle them. That's certainly the case sometimes. For projects, well, especially like Japanese knotweed, where we know it's going to be multiple years of follow-up, we need to come up with a plan of how we're going to do that before we would enroll it. We're not going to enroll we're not going to do a project that we know we can't get our hands on the invasive. So sometimes we can find outside funding in addition to our budget, but that would be a conversation we need to have in advance. Yeah. So I think we need to move on, but I can answer your individual questions later. How's that sound?
Okay, so here's the next slide that for the twig quiz while we get Christian set up. And so of course, sometimes land is not in agriculture, and there's other times when you might be in agriculture, but the landowner really isn't interested in working with federal or state agencies, or there's some reason why CREP does not make sense. In that case, we've got other sources of funding that are either state or private or a combination of both. And Christian Slater from Watersheds United Vermont will talk about some of those other opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. I feel like WUV made it to the big time now.
Did that go by too fast?
All right, so thanks for having us, Shawn. Christian Pelletier. I work for Watersheds United Vermont, and you might also recognize me from the White River Partnership. But like Shawn said, today I just want to talk about some of the funding opportunities that WUV can provide for riparian tree plantings. So quickly, just wanted to introduce WUV and the WUV team. There's a lot of faces I recognize here, but some new ones. So WUV is Watersheds United Vermont. And as part of our mission, where we try to advocate and bring together watershed groups, and a big part of that in recent years has been providing funding for a whole variety of projects, and that's been a huge part of our work, and we've grown our grants team. And so just quickly, if they can wave over there, we have Lynn, our director, and then our newest member of WUV that we're really happy to have, Toby, who you'll likely get emails from and helping organize us over there. And I'm Christian, our grant administrator. So just quickly wanted to highlight some statistics from our plantings last year and what we have planned for this year. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of different funding sources. And in 2024, we have 11 plantings planned through our DEC Woody Buffer program, 5 pure plantings, and 7 NIFWF plantings. All these acronyms will probably make sense to you all later. In 2023, through the pure planting funding source, we had 5 planting sites, 17.5 acres planted, and almost 6,000 stems in the ground. And in 2023, through our DEC Woody Buffer block grant, we had 10 planting sites, 21 acres planted, and almost 8,000 stems. So I put up a list of our planting partners last year. Just wanted to thank any of them that are here. And we've been running this program for a while, so there's even a few planting partners that planted with us in previous years that aren't listed, but a big thank you to everyone who makes these plantings happen. So now I want to jump into our probably our biggest source of funding to fund planting sites, and that's our DEC Woody Buffer Block Grant. Currently, we have funding available for fall 2024 plantings, and then we're going to be transitioning to our cycle for 2025 spring and fall plantings. WUV operates this grant program a little differently than our normal project-oriented grants. We have it rolling right now, so if you have a fall 2024 planting, you're welcome to submit a rolling application at any time. After we get through the fall plantings, we do try and batch our spring applications for this funding source. So we're going to have applications for spring 2025 plantings due October 23rd. We have $150,000 available right around there for these plantings, so a nice big chunk of funding. And we don't limit the size or the number of applications that a group can submit. And if people are familiar with this source, you might have been used to hearing that these plantings have to support nutrient and sediment reduction traditionally, but we've changed the kind of the framework of these grants, and it's moved into the enhancement grant world, which means there's a broader variety of purposes that are allowable for your riparian planting. 5 of them are listed on the screen, but what I think it essentially means for you all, if you're interested in a planting, is that likely your planting has benefits that'll fit into the enhancement framework. Just some quick important requirements to just be eligible for these DEC woody buffer plantings: 35-foot buffer, minimum of 300 stems per acre, native woody species. These are sites that have been identified in either tactical basin plans or river corridor assessments, or run by a basin planner to get approval. And then to plant these sites, you have to get a 10-year O&M agreement that either you can have a third party take responsibility for the planting or the landowner. So those are kind of some of the high-level things that you need to make sure are in place to just be eligible for these plantings. There's also a set of recommendations in the hope that we can make the best plantings possible. So we like to see stock from Vermont Nurseries. We like to see 3 to 5 foot stems. We have the minimum of a 35-foot buffer, but they can be wider if appropriate at a site. And then you can go more stems per acre. I think a lot of our plantings through this source, we're seeing closer to 400 stems per acre, which is awesome. I hit on some of these before, but a few more eligibility criteria. A big one is that, like I said, it has to be in a tactical basin plan, a river corridor plan, or approved by a watershed, a basin planner. You need a watershed project ID to be eligible for this funding, which is a process that you can go through with your basin planner to get an ID number to then apply for these funds. So if anyone has questions on that, we can walk them through how to get a watershed project database ID. And then we're looking for high priority, cost-effective sites. And then the backstop for this funding, this whole set of funding is under the Vermont CREP Clean Water Initiative Program fiscal policy from 2023, which outlines a whole bunch of other requirements that you have to meet to be eligible to receive this funding from DEC. And I have all these hyperlinks in this presentation. Hopefully after I can have Shawn send it out so you can click through and kind of read through any of these additional requirements. So we have a whole set of eligible expenses for these plantings, and they're fairly traditional. What the eligible expenses are: your mileage, your trees and shrubs, your actual planting costs, whether you do it with staff or with a crew, your project management, and then your time actually putting together a planting plan and kind of the design work of the planting. Also new this year, we allow tools under $5,000 to be funded under this program, which is huge for a lot of groups. So things like shovels, gloves, if you need string trimmers, things like that fall under $5,000 and that have at least a year useful life can be funded under this grant program. So we encourage groups, if they need that to really expand their woody buffer planting programs, it's exciting that's an eligible cost. And just one note, these are cost reimbursable grants, so if you do get this for funding, this funding source, it's not an upfront payment, it's a cost reimbursable grant. Quickly, don't want to spend too much time on this today, but this is kind of, if you do get this funding, you get this milestones and deliverables table that outlines kind of the checklist of milestones you have to hit and the associated deliverables for the program. If you get this funding for WOV, we hope to break this down pretty simple and give you an easy way to report out these templates and upload them into our Google Drive system. But if you are interested in this and this PowerPoint goes out, I really recommend you take time to look at this slide and understand the deliverables, because that really drives what you have to accomplish with these funds. And just some other funding considerations. We look at this program that we really want to support as many buffer plantings as we can. So if there's an eligible high quality planting and we have funding for it, we really try to meet the needs of the planters across the state. But when we do have those competitive rounds, we do have additional selection criteria. So we are looking to prioritize projects outside of the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog basins, projects that meet the statutory goals of the enhancement program, that list of the five benefit or intents of the program that I showed in the first slide, how well you meet those. And then we're looking for projects that can leverage existing match funding opportunities. And oftentimes, WOV has those match opportunities available that we can match you with. So if you don't have match for a project, that's not an issue. You can come to WOV, and we can look at the planting site and provide some of that match and leverage to make your project more competitive. And then we're also looking for your likelihood of success for planting. It's great to show good landowner commitment and your planting costs per acre. Another great thing about this DEC funding source is now that we have enhanced survivorship planting funding, which means that we can provide funds for you to go back and do enhanced survivorship activities after you plant at the site. And that includes things like weeding and vine removal, some basic non-chemical site prep, and also can cover some site replantings. And so this is a great program. It impacts any previously funded planting through DEC funds, but we're also integrating this into our current application. So if you apply, say, for a fall 2024 planting, you can kind of predictively budget out what some of your enhanced survivorship needs would be, whether that's visiting the site the year after to weed it, or something like that. You can budget that into your request from WOV, and we'll award you those funds. So it's just a really great way to get back out to sites and to increase the survivorship. So we're really excited that we can offer these funds as part of this program. Quickly, before I move on to to PURE, the second funding source, everything I talked about today is for the implementation of buffer plantings, but we also have money for project development, so that initial landowner outreach and activities like that. And I didn't put any slides on that in this presentation today, but I wanted to mention we have that funding. We're going to have future rounds of project development funding, and so that's a great source if you're trying to develop these to get them ready to the point when you want to apply for implementation funds. So stay tuned, and maybe when I send this out, I'll add in a quick slide with just details on how to get to our project development grant opportunities. So the second and last funding opportunity I want to talk about today is our PURE planting funds. This is a private company that provides planting funds to WOV to grant out. And I previously mentioned how WOV can provide matching funds. This is kind of what I was talking about. We have this separate source of funds, and we get to obligate a certain amount of stems to them to plantings across Vermont each year. And this is a great source that we oftentimes pair up with either DEC plantings or other sources to create a really good solid budget for a planting. So we've obligated a bunch of our PURE stems this year already, but we still have 1,000 stems that are looking for a home in fall 2024. And we don't have an application process for this program. If you have a site that you think could work into the PURE framework, then we just ask you to contact us, and we kind of swap around trees and make sure all the stems can find a home. So if you're interested in stems for fall 2024, we have 1,000. Get in contact with us, and then we have approximately 4,000 stems that we're trying to obligate for spring and fall plantings of 2025. So this PURE Projet private funding has a completely different set of requirements on what's allowable and where you can plant. But luckily, it does kind of converge nicely with the DEC site, but there are some extra requirements that are all listed here. And once again, I don't want to go over all of them today, but I'll share this out and you can read through. Some big ones to hit is that monitoring is required if you use Pure Projet funds for 2 years after planting, which is great. You get to go out and see the progress of the site. There's a separate Pure landowner agreement that you have to sign. And then Pure is really looking for landowners that are really on board for these plantings, and they require a landowner testimonial. So this is a good funding source when you have a landowner that's really willing, committed, willing to give a testimonial, and potentially be willing to have the Pure folks come to their site and visit it in the future. The Pure monitoring process, like I said, they require monitoring for 2 years after the planting, and they require that the planting has a survival rate of 75% or higher, and if not, there's a few different ways we can troubleshoot to hopefully provide some extra stems. But oftentimes these plantings are really large, and to get that 75% number, if you have a 3,000 stem planting, it might be really difficult to count every stem. So we've developed a sampling method using transects in a buffer to serve as kind of a proxy of what your true survival rate is. And so that's made it a lot easier for groups to get out to a site just for a few hours and do their sampling. So if you're interested in this Pure funding, I'm happy to talk about that sampling method more with you. Or if you're just interested in how we sample in general for this to apply it to other fundings, other plantings you have, just to get an idea of the buffer health, we're also happy to share our information on it. And quickly, the payment structure for Pure plantings is completely different. It's a price per stem that you get. So we give you $5.50 per stem before you're planting, $1.25 right after you're planting, once you've submitted some deliverables, and then 50 cents per stem after you've done your monitoring, for a total of $7.25 per stem. So it's completely different in the structure of how you get payment than something like your DEC Woody Buffer Block Grant. And oftentimes, as you'll see, the $7.25 doesn't really capture the full cost of a planting per stem, so that's why it pairs really well with other funding sources. So yeah, just next steps is please get in contact with us ASAP if you're interested in this Pure funding. Like I said, we don't have a competitive round. If there's a need and the site works, we try and get you stems through Pure, so please be in contact with us. And I think I'm going to transfer it over to Jess, who's going to talk about a few more sources of funding, one of which that WUV also holds. And I just wanted to note before I moved along that the Natural Resource Conservation Council also holds the funding sources that I talked about today. So there are a few different entities that hold these funding sources through Vermont. And any eligible entity is welcome to apply to any source that holds these funds. Traditionally, the districts have applied to the districts, and watershed groups have come to WUV. But if there's ever a question or there's timing that works better, if you're an eligible entity and you're interested in the WUV grant programs, please reach out to us. And thanks, everyone.
I wonder if before Jess goes up, are there any questions about the block grant or the Pure funding?
Good. Yep.
You stated the minimum buffer was 35 feet. Is there a maximum?
No, there's no maximum. So if the site requires, we've had much wider buffers. So yeah, no maximum. Anyone else? And we'll be around for a large part of the day if anyone has questions or wants to talk to us about the grant programs.
Okay. I have a question about that. You had said that that the priority is for outside the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog watersheds, but if there are people within those, they should still apply. Right? I mean,
yeah, they're certainly still eligible to apply. Their planting may be more appropriate for a formula grant through the QUISPs. but there are different circumstances that could make a planting fit better into the enhancement structure, or something as simple as timing, or the landowner isn't willing to sign certain things that are required through the formula grant. So there's a bunch of different reasons why a planting might fit better into WUV's riparian buffer program that is under the enhancement framework than it might work into the formula grant. So I guess I wouldn't want anyone to be deterred by location to apply for us, or at least get in contact to us. We can steer you in the right direction as far as eligibility goes, but the best bet is if you have a planting and you want to come to WUV, get in contact with us and we can help you navigate it. Awesome. Thanks.
All right, are you guys loaded up? Okay, you're loaded up on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, all right. Okay. Jess Miller from the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts.
All right, so I apologize, everybody. I did not do a PowerPoint. I have this really boring Excel sheet that I'm just going to pull up here. And okay. I mean, who wants to look at PowerPoint when you can look at Excel? All right, so, wow, it's nice to see all your flannel shirts from up here. Okay, so this is just kind of a matrix that I use to walk through the funding options with districts when we review them every year. I'm going to just hide DEC and Pure Projet since we've covered those, but as Christian said, we Mac user. Somebody give me a hint. Is hide under? Yeah, try that. All right, we'll leave him up. That's okay. We'll scoot it over. Okay, so I guess I'll just say that our the CREP funding policy that really sort of underpins the DEC Woody Buffer Block Grant and the planting guidelines that Christian showed, which I think the set of guidelines I have maybe originally came from the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. We really use those even when we go after other funding sources, federal funding sources or private funding sources, although Pure Projet is kind of its own thing, we really use those to standardize eligibility requirements, deliverable requirements, that kind of stuff, so we can sort of keep those elements of funding consistent across the program. And at NRCC, we have 4 different funding sources. We have DEC and Pure Projet, and then we also have a Lake Champlain Basin Program grant. Just taking sort of a step back, where these sources tend to differ is more in the objective of the funder. So as we all know, there's just a million different benefits to installing riparian buffers. And our funders tend to really focus on 1 or 2 of those that they care most about. So that will really help determine the direction a project goes in terms of how it gets funded. Some of our funders are also geographically focused. As Christian mentioned, our DEC Woody Buffer Block Grant now is we're prioritizing sites outside of Lake Champlain Basin and Mammoth for Magog. And there's also a little bit of variety around how much funding is available for stewardship and monitoring. So those kind of three areas are the areas that tend to change from funding source to funding source. So we have a Lake Champlain Basin Award, and I'm sorry, I have like some total award amounts listed here, and I realize now that I don't actually have like the whole span of the award period, which is different by funder. But we've had this Lake Champlain Basin Program Award since 2021, I'm pretty sure, and we're coming to the end of it. It ends in February of next year, so I expect to award maybe 2 or 3 more projects under this grant, and then we'll be just about done with it. This has been an awesome source of funding for us. The Lake Champlain Basin program is really focused pretty broadly on clean water and habitat restoration, but pretty narrowly geographically just in the Lake Champlain Basin. And Lake Champlain Basin program does not necessarily, like our award at least, doesn't have sort of a pot of money for monitoring and stewardship. However, they've just been amazing partners. I can think of one site in particular that Pulteney Meadowy did a couple years ago and had invested a lot of time and energy and resources into really making this site successful. The landowner was really enthusiastic, and it just happened to be a year where rodent predation was just a big issue in that part of the state, and that site got hit pretty hard. So they were able to sort of cobble together other funding sources, and we went back to Lake Champlain Basin program, and they were willing to let us use some of our funding to replant that site that we had already funded. And we'd also been in sort of communication after the flooding last year about replanting sites that were hit by the flooding, which we didn't end up needing to do, but there was a lot of flexibility there. So it's been really helpful to have like local team of people administering some of these awards who are able to offer some flexibility around how they're used. The one other funding source that I just wanted to touch on is our NIFWF award, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which we share with WOW. These grants are going out to watershed groups and to districts to do habitat-focused plantings, specifically in areas where eastern brook trout is present. Although we're not limited to eastern brook trout habitat, we have been sort of targeting those areas especially. And let's see, what else do I want to say about this one? And yeah, monitoring and stewardship is required under this grant for 1 year. So it's been nice also to just see sort of more money sort of coming in for monitoring stewardship. And we use the same, again, we use the same kind of practices that are available under the enhanced survivorship treatment that DEC offers. So weeding around the base of stems and helping trees get a competitive advantage over the first couple of years, and replanting where necessary. And the other thing about this award, we're starting to use it this spring to help boost some of the CREP plantings and boost stem density in CREP plantings. That has been a nice sort of, feels like it's going to be sort of a win-win for everybody in making those stronger plantings. So we're going to start doing the first of those next month. And I guess one other thing to just mention about this funding source, the challenge is this is our one funding source that does require match, and it's a pretty hefty match. It's a 1-to-1 match. So particularly when we want to do these partnerships, it always takes a little bit of sort of thinking through, how particularly we're going to pair a federal funding source with a federal partner. Can't really use that as match. So it always takes this little bit of putting the pieces of the puzzle together and sort of figuring this out. And thankfully, we have like awesome state partners who are able to sort of help us make that work. And we can use some of our Woody Buffer Block Grant as match. We can use some of our Pure Projet award as match. So yeah, I really kind of see all of these funding sources as just like a big collaboration and a way for us to get more trees in the ground around the state. Yeah, that's all I have. Is there any questions?
This, okay. So Jess and Christian, rather the groups themselves, the planting groups, don't necessarily have to figure out where all these funding sources are coming from. You guys help put that together for them and figure out whether a formula grant makes more sense than one of the enhancement grants and so on.
Yeah, I think probably we approach things like slightly differently, depending, NRCC and WUV, but I think that for both of us, we're all very aware of the different funding sources that are available and able to really help groups match with the one that's going to be best for their project or more than one that's going to be best for their project and find match. And yeah, if a formula grant is more appropriate, I think we're aware of what those projects are and we can send them in the right direction.
Any other questions for Jess or Christian? Okay, we've got one other funding source. Kyle Gray is here from Throwe Environmental. Here he is. This was specific to the Connecticut River watershed. And so maybe not applicable to everyone here, but this seemed like an important extra funding source to talk about. Also, I just want to mention that I messed up already in terms of the agenda. I kind of skipped over the announcement from partners. So after Kyle's done, we'll do the announcement from partners. Okay. Might be Phil's. Okay.
All right. First try on the tech. That's good. That's a good start. Well, good to see everyone. A huge crowd today. I think I counted like 80 or 90 people, so really happy with the turnout here. Again, as Shawn mentioned, this is the Long Island Sound Futures Fund, one of several National Fish and Wildlife Foundation programs. This is specifically relevant to the folks in the Connecticut River Basin, and I'll go over what that geography actually looks like. But it is focused on, ultimately, Long Island Sound. So I want to give a little bit of background about my company and, the role that we play here. So we're a group called Throwe Environmental based out of Rhode Island, and we contract with the Fish and Wildlife Foundation to offer field liaison services for this program. So I'm not NIFWF, don't shoot, but I am kind of their outreach arm for this specific program. So we help applicants across the basin, but specifically in the upper basin, build competitive proposals for the Futures Fund, as well as NIFWF's National Coastal Resilience Fund. This program has operated for about 22 years at this point. It's the Long Island Sound program, so they typically had spent a lot of time focusing on, the South Shore of Connecticut, North Shore of Long Island. The past few years, probably since the last time this partnership met in person, NIFWF has brought our team at Throwe Environmental on as field liaisons for the upper basin because they weren't really seeing the competitive proposals that they wanted to, and they wanted to provide more technical assistance and more on-the-ground resources to folks in New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. So we'll go through what some of that looks like. So Long Island Sound Futures Fund. It's a $12 million program. It typically was like $3 to $5 million for most of its existence, but with all of this federal funding that came through over the past few years, it's really gotten a boost. I expect that'll be the case for maybe another cycle or two. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if come 2026 or 2027, it dips a little bit. So if this looks good to you now, you might want to think about applying. Most of the funding is coming from EPA, with some as well coming from the Long Island Sound Study and from Fish and Wildlife Service. Because EPA is the big driver here, this is a water quality focused program, and we'll go through how to articulate that in a proposal. But I would pay attention to the fact that EPA is up there because at the end of the day, nitrogen is going to be the big focus of this program. So a couple things to consider on this slide, and I know there's a lot of text. So this giant teal box that you see on the right side of the screen, that is called the Long Island Sound Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan. It's the CCMP. So essentially, you've got the Long Island Sound Study Program, and that's the program that organizes, improvements for the sound. You've got the CCMP, which is like the Bible for that Long Island Sound Study, right? It's organizing and outlining what restoration and management of the sound will look like. And then you've got the Futures Fund, the program that I'm here for. That's essentially the funding arm of the CCMP and the program itself. So with that being the case, this plan then becomes very important because applications for this program should really link back to the CCMP so that reviewers, when they read your application, they see, all right, these people know, what they're talking about. It links up to the overall program goals, which makes projects competitive. So they've got a couple really broad umbrellas that they put out there for applicants to pay attention to. The first is at the top of the screen, the cross-cutting principles. So essentially those are, the three biggest umbrellas that you would want to emphasize at every point in your application. So these are resilience, sustainability, and environmental justice. So if your projects touch on any of those, I would say emphasize those points as much as you can, because essentially you're telling the reviewers, hey, we really are in line with the CCMP. The next kind of overarching umbrella that you have to consider are the themes. And the only theme that the state of Vermont is eligible for is clean waters and healthy watersheds. So there is no decision to make on your part. That's the theme that fits for the state. And essentially, this is the water quality theme. So folks down in the basin can do resilience work and they can do coastal restoration work. But up in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, the only theme that's eligible is clean waters and healthy watersheds, which is totally focused on nitrogen pollution prevention or reduction, all with eventual benefits downstream to Long Island Sound. So you'll see some examples of projects up here. We've got things like green infrastructure, low impact development. Of course, we've got riparian and forested buffers like we've heard a lot about this morning. We've got stream channel restoration to floodplains. And then I see nobody's taking a picture. I'll go to this next slide. We've got some more examples here. So replacing and right-sizing culverts, but still with a connection to nitrogen. So not so much like a transportation connection if a road is degrading, but more so, how does fixing those culverts ultimately help with nitrogen downstream? And then there's a lot of ag practices that are eligible here too. Things like general technical assistance to rural landowners, addressing ag runoff, soil health best practices, regenerative ag, or precision nutrient management. So there's a lot of wiggle room here, and it could range from municipal green infrastructure to ag to forested buffers. But again, the through line is nitrogen and nutrient prevention. And one point to mention, the little yellow star here, the CCMP is going to be updated next year. It's a 5-year plan, and it's at the end of its life cycle. So I don't know what that means necessarily because they're still having those workshops, but something's going to change. So if you don't like what you see on screen this year, it may be different next cycle. So here's the geography. So specifically, we're looking at the picture on the right, obviously. This is the entire watershed, right, for this program. So it goes from the North Shore of Long Island through Connecticut, Western Mass, all the way up along the Vermont and New Hampshire border following the Connecticut River. So you've got to be inside this red boundary. If you are not, and you're doing most of your work over on the west side of the state, maybe in the Lake Champlain basin, not eligible for this program. There are other NIFWF funding opportunities, and I would direct your attention to the Northeast Forests and Rivers program, which does a lot of, stream buffer restoration. They do, large woody debris, things like that, and that's mostly focused on habitat rather than nitrogen. But if you fall within the red line, you are geographically eligible for this program. So this is not just implementation funding, and a lot of the time, we hear potential applicants say, well, isn't this just for shovel-ready projects? And it is for shovel-ready projects, but it's also for planning and project development. So you can submit a capacity building and a planning grant, you can submit a public education grant, or you can go for preliminary design, site assessment, alternatives analyses, things like that. and you'll see the funding amounts on screen. So planning and design grants have to be between $50,000 and $500,000. Implementation can range up to $1.5 million, and then participation in education projects, if you happen to be working across state lines and working in Connecticut or New York, those can be between 50 to 100. But essentially any phase of the pipeline, and NIFWF has this kind of habit that they like to fund projects that are already in the pipeline. So if you apply for a planning or a design grant, they're definitely more inclined to keep funding you. You have to recompete every year, it's not guaranteed, but they like to see projects that they've already invested in kind of move through towards implementation. So some general guidelines here. The period of performance for planning and design grants is typically 2 years. For implementation projects, it can be up to 3. And then there's some guidance on screen about when dollars can or can't be spent. The pre-proposal due date right now, the RFP is open. It's due May 13th. It typically takes the summer and fall to review applications, and then grants will be announced in November. I do want to spend some time on match. So there's a 50% required match here, non-federal funding, but it can be cash, it can be in kind, volunteer time. Some of the WUV funding that we heard about, especially the DEC block grants, I think that could be useful. I won't spend a lot of time on this. These are just some ineligible activities, things like research, marketing, political advertising. Land acquisition is not eligible, but you can use land as match. Quickly, I'll just talk about proposal labs. So there is no pre-proposal for this program, but there are these optional office hours or proposal labs that NIFWF has, where you can go in and ask direct questions of the program staff. So our team is here to help kind of workshop ideas in the background, but if you feel like it'd be beneficial to talk directly to NIFWF, you have that opportunity too. I think this is the last one here. The date's on screen, and there actually is an email for questions. I would say if you're looking for field liaison support, you can reach out to Chris on our team, and if you'd like to talk directly to NIFWF, Victoria's email is on screen. So that'll be that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Any questions for Kyle? Oh,
Yeah.
Got one here? You want to, hold on, let me just give you the.
I'm good and loud, but I'm happy to use that. You mentioned that culverts can be replaced and upsized.
Yeah.
Would other crossing structures be included, like bridges?
Yeah, they could be. It would ultimately come down to, can you make a strong nitrogen connection? So obviously that gets to be harder with culverts, right? There's a lot of data that needs to be collected. You can use this funding to get baseline data, but at the end of the day, they're going to ask you, is this a nitrogen project? And if in your heart of hearts it's a transportation project, that's fine, right? They don't care about that. You need to sell it on paper as nitrogen. So I would say if you have the information and the data to do that, you'd be competitive. If you feel like that's too much of a lift, you may want to look elsewhere because they're probably going to come back to you and say, you've got to frame this as nitrogen. But it's not a non-starter, it's definitely eligible.
Cool.
Yeah, good question. Anyone else? All right, thanks so much.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay. We've got, this is the rearrangement of the agenda here. So this is announcements from partners. So I've got 2 people who said that they wanted to make an announcement. So if you want to say anything during this time, you can go after them. Is Lauren here? There she is. Lauren Jess from Lake Champlain Basin Program is here to talk a little bit about Streamwise and how partners can help promote that program. You can go up there. Well, whatever you want. Would you prefer this? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted, as Shawn said, to provide a quick update on Streamwise, which is the new voluntary property assessment and awards program for non-agriculture land located along rivers and streams in the Lake Champlain Basin. I have a lot of familiar Streamwise faces in the room, so if you were a state or federal partner that helped develop the program, can you please stand up? Chris, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Will, thanks for rocking the Streamwise hat. And if you have been trained or will be trained to be a Streamwise assessor, also please stand up and wave so everybody knows who I'm talking about. We're doing all the great work for Streamwise. So this year we were able to fund 13 organizations to participate in Streamwise, 2 in New York, Osable River, thanks for being here, 1 in Quebec, and 10 in Vermont. So that's Grand Isle County, NRCD, where'd Molly go, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, Franklin County, NRCD, Franklin Watershed Committee, I lost track. I wasn't starting on my fingers. Memorial County Conservation District, Missisquoi River Basin Association, Friends of the Winooski River, Friends of the Mad River, Lake Champlain Committee, Stewards of the Greensboro Watershed. Was that 10, hopefully? So all together as the one big group, we plan to conduct just over 100 Streamwise assessments throughout the Lake Champlain watershed this year. And so we'd be walking with landowners along their property, looking at various metrics within the first 50 to 100 feet of the stream's edge. Reach out to Karina if you want to know exactly what that experience feels like. She had a Streamwise assessment done last year. And so we all will be conducting outreach collaboratively together throughout the year, online and in person. So if you are interested in working with us to learn how we are going to promote Streamwise property assessments, but also just promote in general stream best management practices for flood resiliency, habitat, and climate change, water quality, please find one of us that stood up. Thank you.
Karina's stream got an award, by the way. Got the Streamwise award. Any questions about Streamwise? If you don't know about that program, it's one to look up and to help promote. So we are going out and restoring stream banks that lost all their trees at some point during their history. But Streamwise is really a program that will help keep the forested buffers that are there still there. Help landowners understand how important those are for not only water quality but flood resilience. So it's definitely a good program to support and promote. Dave, did you want to say something? Yeah. Okay.
Streamwise is appropriate for non-agricultural land. Is forest management considered agriculture?
I'm not sure I understand the question. It's for land that's currently forested along buffers.
And where a forest management plan is in place.
So we built Streamwise to be non-regulatory volunteer, so filling in the gap between like forestry management plans and working with the Agency of Ag. That's not to preclude doing a property assessment on one of those lands. We just are prioritizing private property owners first. Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity to for like consulting foresters and Streamwise to connect, because if they're if the consulting foresters are really sort of thinking, okay, this is the forest on the upland parts of the property, and not necessarily I think there's a tendency to maybe think of the lower lands as being sort of either ag or So anyway, it'd be nice if they mentioned Streamwise as a program that the landowner might be interested in. Any other questions? Okay. Jess Rubin also asked for some time to speak to you. She has a project that's happening on Shelburne Farms this summer, and an ongoing project. So she'll be talking to you about multifunctional riparian forested buffers, restoration, education, training, and renaturization at Shelburne Farms. Do you want this, or do you want to go up? Whatever you're most comfortable with.
Either way is fine. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much. It's so neat to see the different puzzle pieces of all of us working together to protect our watersheds and ecosystems. So deep bow to you all. So my name's Jess Rubin. I'm a restoration ecologist. for MycoEvolve, a local ecological resilience service, Earthworks Education and Research, and it's an example of a small business that bridges academic funding, federal funding, and state funding for watershed resilience. I also wear a hat as a mycophytoremediation research technician for the UVM Plant Soil Science Department, soon to be renamed. And I'm here to just share an announcement and a couple invitations. Take a deep breath for a moment. I know we all just got exposed to a lot of amazing information. Okay, so the name of the project we gratefully received from Lake Champlain Basin is a mycophytoremediation and multifunctional riparian forested buffers, restoration, education, training, and rematriation. It's a mouthful. And so this is a project that has begun. As of yesterday, we planted a couple thousand species. The mycelium is running, and it is built on a 4-year proof of concept that's currently at Shelburne Farms. We have one publication in restoration ecology already published, another one impending in the next few weeks in a journal called Sustainability, in a special issue. And without spilling the beans on that, the small findings are that we are discovering slowly, and I'm sure many of you are already onto this too, ways to improve forested rebuffer management, design, installation, and management. It's been amazing to see how much more funding is now going towards maintenance. That wasn't the case a few years ago. And so I kind of want to invite you all to participate in any way that your organization feels called as collaborators. And I'm going to offer a couple different ways. The skinny of what we found from the proof of concept is that obviously restoring degraded riparian buffers can mitigate phosphorus effectively, increase pollinator habitat, and allow land access back to the original peoples while growing eco-literacy in the bioregional community, which, as we know, is so crucial for the next generation, starting in elementary school. And so some of the ways we're doing that, and if you would be willing to put that flyer up, is we're going to be hosting a bunch of volunteer work days. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the fact that you can remove non-native species with no chemicals, we have a couple sites that demonstrate we've done this effectively. We have year 5 you can look at this spring. There's a couple of really amazing strategies. All you need is a dedicated team, muscles, and good snacks. So these workshops will offer the opportunity to train people in that. We are also developing a curriculum for the schools in the state involving ecological restoration and the multidisciplines involved, chemistry, biology, earth science, hydrology, working with both elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and the universities and colleges in the community. And we're working with several Abenaki collaborators. I know that's a very controversial topic, and if you want to talk about it at lunch, I'm happy to discuss that. I'm working with some grandmothers where their lineage is uncontested, and so they have helped design the plant palette. So one of the neat things is that this new project, the amendments to our pilot, are fourfold. So one, the original pilot used a commercial mycorrhizae, and at some point we can discuss why that's potentially problematic. So we published a guide on how to grow endemic mycorrhizae. It's free on SARE. And so this new project uses endemic mycorrhizae from the forest. Jury's still out on whether you need mycorrhizae for restoring riparian buffers. Get back to us in 3 years at the end of this project. But we also have found for sure with statistically significant data, buffers and decreases in phosphorus in the soil through different phosphorus metrics, through specific management practices that are currently not practiced in riparian buffer management. Cyclical coppicing, in short, which is removing the above-ground biomass of perennials cyclically, not in ways that are going to affect migrating and overwintering birds or inverts, but in ways that actually physically remove the phosphorus. And we're kind of double, triple functioning it because all the species in our palette are pollinator providers, as well as edible, medicinal, or utilitarian to the Abenaki. And so they're essentially being able to reaccess their food, medicine, tools, and removing phosphorus. And then we've been quantifying the phosphorus uptake in these different plants, so over time we can potentially provide, per hectare, obviously it's not willow plantations we're completely cutting, but cyclically. So that's kind of where we're at, and you're invited to come to any of these workshops. And also want to just mention that our deliverable in this 3-year project is to create a guide for the state to inform riparian buffer management. And we really look forward to collaborating with the DEC, CREP, NRCS, PER, Watersheds United, conservation commissions, and anyone else. Obviously, we have a lot of questions, and we're mostly filled with humility and wonder, but we're also excited. So feel free to be in touch. I'm going to put up a couple flyers over there. Also have a quick little write-up on some of the terms like microremediation, phytoremediation, and one thing, while this is a farm, phosphorus, unlike other nutrients, is not a toxin as we likely know in the body, so you can eat the elderberries. It's not like at a Superfund site. So it's kind of a different application of it. I would say like an easier entry to bringing this into state and federal funded practices without some of the complications you get in those more difficult sites. So thank you so much, and yeah, I think that's it. Thanks, Jess.
Any questions for Jess? Okay, let's take a break. There's a lot of information. I think everybody needs a little time to digest. And if we could meet back here right at 10:30, so 10-minute break. And then we'll start talking a little bit more about site maintenance and the nitty-gritty of planting. All right, thanks, everyone. Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and sit down and get started with the next session. Hello. I know this is the best part, and so yeah, we'll have some more. We'll have another break soon, and then there's lunch. So I first started planting trees with the Friends of the Winooski in like 2013 or something like that, so a long time ago. And our method for planting back then was plant the tree into whatever vegetation was there, say goodbye, and not, no site maintenance, no site prep, and just hope for the best. And so, and often when we would go back to look and see how those plantings did, there was often, it was often underwhelming. The tree survivorship wasn't so great, and you all know, most of you know how this is. You go back to the site and you planted 400 trees an acre, and there's maybe 50% of them are still there, and often they're not, you expect them to be so high, and they're still kind of like this. We learned really quickly that some sort of maintenance after planting is really needed. We don't always have the funding for that, but as much as possible, we've realized that some sort of site maintenance is really important. And Katie Kain from US Fish and Wildlife, who provides technical assistance to a lot of us in terms of project development, landowner outreach, project planning, and even planting the trees themselves, and managing volunteers and that sort of thing. Will talk to us about her current thoughts about site maintenance and site prep. Here's Katie.
Okay, thanks, Shawn. Sorry to break up the fun of the break. So if you don't know me, I'm Katie Kain. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm just going to share some updates of some of our site prep and stewardship work that we've been doing over the last few years. So this is really cool. There are some new faces in the room to me. So quick refresher. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. So as Shawn mentioned, we offer financial and technical assistance to habitat restoration projects on private land across the state. Though we work for a federal agency, we're the private lands habitat restoration program for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So program as a whole, we work statewide and even a little bit into New York, and we have biologists that focus on riparian, wetland restoration, and aquatic organism passage. So we do that work partnering with lots of people in the room today, state, federal, nonprofit, conservation districts, to put those projects on the ground. So I primarily focus on riparian restoration, which is what we're talking about here today. So I wanted to take us back a little bit before I jump into fun pictures of why we started talking more about stewardship and maintenance in these projects. So this is a slide from a 5-year monitoring study that Leah Safransky did, who used to work in our office. And this was showing after 5 years, we're seeing on average across all of these projects that were monitored, which was about 27 sites across the state, about 1,500 stems. After 5 years, we have 65% survival. So Christian, I heard you earlier mentioning Pure Projet, 75% survival benchmark. And so we started to think we might need to do a little bit more to meet our goals on these projects. 10 years out, Annalise Carrington in our office, this is a slide from one of her presentations, came back and revisited those sites to see another 5 years in what has happened. And basically what we learned is of those 65% that were alive, by kind of health level there, of healthy, moderate, unhealthy, those unhealthy ones drop off. And so our final survival on these projects was a little bit less than 50%. Like Shawn said, kind of underwhelming. So what we learned from that is that we don't need to wait to take management action, and that a lot of these projects do need some more help to meet the goals that we're looking for. One of the things particularly from this monitoring data that we got was project success based on prior land use. So this is showing natural regeneration that we saw based off of the land use before a site went into a restoration project. So we can see, I think we all know this, the corn sites, the natural regeneration that you get if you have a woody seed source there is through the roof. Whereas those fallow sites, like a Trees for Streams, somebody's backyard, or like stream side area, pasture, hay, those are a lot more challenging. And we saw the same trend for planted stems, that those were facing a lot more competition on these sites, and those are the sites we come back and it's like, is this really doing what we want it to do? So just to show, this is from one of Leah's presentations, 2008, a pasture site that went into a restoration project, and 4 years later, 2012, doesn't look a whole lot different. Karina, also I should say you started this, the very beginning. I'm seeing you looking at these pictures, and actually you might have taken that first one. So we're seeing not a very big change in terms of the vegetation cover, woody species coming in, whereas a corn site, 2016, and then just a couple years later in 2019, the natural regeneration, kind of the structural diversity that we're seeing on that site, a lot more impressive. So a couple more slides from Annalise here. What we saw 10 years out is that the natural regeneration on these not cornfield sites, or sites where we haven't done any sort of site preparation, maybe it's accounting for 5 to 10% of the stem density. So really, in the timelines that we're often looking at for these projects, we can't count on that natural regen to get our projects to where we want them to be. And those hayfield pasture sites, we're not seeing a dominant vegetation change yet, 10 years out. We've got structural diversity. It's not to say the project isn't accomplishing some of our goals, but we started thinking, how can we more cost-effectively promote this change that we want to see on these project sites? Also, do we need to? And that comes back to what's your goal for these projects. So for myself, for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we're looking at these sites for ecological restoration. We want to improve wildlife habitat, water quality, and we're thinking about diversity at multiple levels, so also that herbaceous layer, in addition to planting trees and shrubs on these sites. These might not be the same goals that your organization has or that your funder has. They might be interested in nitrogen or bank stability. So recognizing that coming in, not all of these projects are going to look the same, but often we have a lot of overlap in where we can kind of put our goals together and put a project on the ground. And then also the timeline that you're looking for restoration. So there's been a lot of talk at these meetings the last couple of years about the lollipop forests. And those are still, in my mind, successful projects, I want to say. Like, those are going to get there in the end. It's a different timeline. And you're going to have different short-term goals. So, you know, a project in 2005 here where, like Shawn said, we planted and walked away. 2017, we've got really nice mature trees here. The understory is still grass. So is that meeting all of our goals? Maybe not. But it depends on what our original goals were. So just to kind of frame that to start with, in terms of what we're looking for in these projects, I think really depends on what your goals are coming in. So adding in site preparation obviously depends on your capacity as an organization, funding and staff time, the landowner interest in doing more on their project, your overall project goals, and the timeline that you have. Often we're doing this work the year before planting, so the summer or the fall, before plants are going in the ground the next spring. But I want to share, I think if you've been to these meetings the last, you know, I know we took a couple years off, but I think you've heard me talk about the site prep work we've been doing, and then also some of the stewardship, like doing spot spraying and weed whacking around stems. So now I just want to show some fun stuff that we've seen in terms of success of using this on projects the last couple years. So the benefits, starting with site prep, that we've seen is reducing competition for those planted stems, having better planting conditions. Phil showed a slide where we had done some treatment, and we've gotten really good feedback from planters or from landowners, like it makes it so much faster, not having to cut through the sod. And then consequently, your stems are gonna do better. And then promoting that diversity in the herbaceous layer. So here's a project from last year. It got planted in the spring of 2023, and we did treatment the fall before. And I should note, most of these that I'm showing, these are CREP projects. So like Phil spoke to, kind of we have a little bit more capacity to come back to those projects and put more effort into them. And also when I'm saying site preparation in terms of what we're doing, that is most often an herbicide application. And that's partially because of our own capacity. That's what we have the equipment to do, access to the site, and just the timeline of coming back multiple times to do tilling versus being able to go out to a site kind of one and done, do a treatment, and then keep our capacity rolling to hit other sites. So planting happened. We kind of missed getting shots during the growing season here, but when we came back in October, the natural regeneration that we saw on this site was really astounding. So we saw all of these box elder seedlings come in. There's Phil pointing to the planted stem there in the middle, and then all of these little box elders that are coming in. And this is across the whole site that we saw this. So we're hopeful this is going to look like one of those cornfield sites in a couple years. This is still pretty new in terms of us putting it on the ground. So we don't have a ton of like down the road, what do these look like yet? But this gave us a window of opportunity for those seeds to hit bare soil, be able to germinate, and have a growing season to start to get above that herbaceous competition. You can see in this picture, a bunch of stuff came back in. It doesn't stay bare ground. But it's not all grass at this point. We gave those extra seedlings a head start and really boosted our density and our diversity on this site. So just a couple slides showing another project where before we did any prep and then afterwards kind of what that looks like. This was a really large CREP buffer. Total project size was like 30 acres. So there it is when we're planting. This is the landowner doing the planting. And then a year later, the herbaceous response that we got on this site was really exciting. So just in terms of like a pollinator benefit, species diversity, our planted stems are in here. They're not very tall yet, so it's not a very exciting picture in that regard. But the change from taking this to a hayfield in terms of the species diversity that we saw coming in was really exciting. So, and you can see in this picture, we have Joe Pieweed and boneset, milkweed. There are a bunch of little speckled alders that came in. You just can't see them in this photo, but hopefully if we go back this year, it's gonna look really different. Just to share another example, what we're starting with, this low diversity hayfield situation. Come in and remove the grass layer. There's all of our little planted stems before the leaves come out. And then what that looks like later in the growing season. Again, so this is a site where we didn't get like this really compelling natural regeneration come in, but we changed the herbaceous layer here from grass. And that's really starting to jumpstart our restoration process. So we're seeing blue vervain, St. John's wort, primrose, milkweed, this really nice diversity of native species that came in that they would show up eventually as trees grow up and start to cast shade, and we would start to see that change, but we're making it happen a lot faster with these practices. So this is creating pollinator habitat, food source for birds, other wildlife species, and helping to transition that out of grass, which is not only helping our trees survive, but also is removing meadow vole habitat, which is a really big problem in these grass areas as voles come in and start to girdle our trees. So June of 2022 is what that looked like, and then July of 2023, our stems are starting to take off. This is from the same area. So most of this that we're seeing is what was planted, but the rate that it's grown, that it's getting above this herbaceous layer, and then we're still seeing this really nice complexity in terms of herbaceous species instead of just that grass layer. So not every site looks like that, I should say. The response that we get from these sites depends on the seeds that were in the soil to start with, how long they've been there, obviously how close you are to woody species that are going to be able to seed in to give that natural regeneration response, and then the original cover that you're dealing with and how long that was on the site. So the dreaded reed canary grass that we all hate to see when we walk out to a potential site. So this was partially an active production being hayed, and then part of it was fallow, this really thick grass layer kind of in the background there. So we came in and we did one application the fall before planting. This was a timeline issue. If we'd had more time, it would have been great to do 2 applications beforehand for reed canary grass. So this ended up being a 3-year process. We sprayed before planting, and then through CREP, the first year, we were able to come in and do spot spraying around the stems, because this wasn't one where we came back and we're like, oh, it's gone, it's totally different. This is great. Reed canary grass comes back. Some sites, it doesn't as much. It'll be like a really different mix of species that come in, but this site, it came right back. It had been there for a long time, and it's not going away easily. So we did 1 year of spot spraying, and then Phil and I came back the next year and did another round. And you can see, this is kind of a hard photo with the angle and the light, but all these shrubs in the background here. We have this silver maple in the beginning, in the front of the picture that's kind of struggling. But our stems are making it. So it took 3 years of work to get to that point, and it is still going to be reed canary grass for a while there, but now we know that these trees, we think, are going to make it, and we can walk away at this point. Spot spraying. Again, I think a lot of people have heard me talk about this. So we've been using this to reduce competition directly around stems where we're not able to come in and do site prep. Same idea as when we're doing string trimming around plantings, but we're seeing kind of some differences down the road in terms of what we're getting from utilizing that chemical versus just manual method there. So we're also seeing faster change in the herbaceous layer on these sites, and some opportunity for natural regeneration. So this is kind of what it looks like originally, just this really targeted application right around our planted stem. And then I know I've shown this photo in presentations before of just like these little footprints that we have, and if you have a seed source nearby, the natural regeneration we're getting in those areas is really cool. So when Shawn asked us originally to talk about this, that was one of the things she said was like, what do those look like down the road? And so now we can show a couple years out. So this was 2018. This is kind of what it looked like from a distance, June of 2017, when this project first went in the ground. You can see these little spot sprayed areas that Ben made this slide that these arrows are pointing to. And that yellow arrow is worth keeping an eye on. That was knotweed that was treated for 5 years on this site. So what does it look like now? Last year, that's what we saw. So our planted stems are in there, but also we got this really, really heavy natural regeneration in this area. And we're on our way to a really successful buffer there. So another shot from the same site. You can see kind of I think Ryan was the one who pointed out, if you're looking on Google Earth now, you can start to pick out our CREP projects because you can see this like Swiss cheese pattern in the imagery. But it's all for a good cause because this is what we end up with in the end. This really, really robust project just a couple years down the road. So we've seen really good results with this in terms of boosting our stem survival and our density. And one more for the reed canary grass. This was a site that responded really well to just one instance of spot spraying. So this is before the project got planted. May, right after stems went in the ground, and you can see these funny little spots where we came and sprayed. 2018, and then 3 years later, 2021, this is what it looked like. And if you keep your eye on, I put a star above that maple in the background. Ben found some really neat drone imagery from the flood in July. So you can see our planted shrubs sticking up above the flooded zone here and that maple tree in the background. So this takes us back to some of our project goals here. Without the spot spraying, our stems probably still would have been there, but we would have lost some to reed canary grass. They probably would have been a lot smaller, would have still been struggling at that point, and wouldn't have fared as well in the flood. So this is, meeting goals of flood resiliency, having those stems established and able to withstand that level of flooding so early on in a project. To wrap it up, I'm going to show some pictures from the same landowner project where we had kind of two different land uses that just shows kind of a neat contrast of the differences that we see. So this was cornfield that got seeded back to grass before we planted. Initially we were like, yes, it's in corn, it's perfect, don't touch it. And then there was a miscommunication and it got seeded. So it was kind of disappointing, but now it provides kind of a neat contrast. So before planting, right after planting, we came in and did our spot spraying, and you can see in the front there's kind of like this weird little circle of different vegetation. That's from where we knocked back the grass and different things started to come in. And what it looks like in 2022, pretty good. We've got our trees showing up. We're starting to see some change in that herbaceous layer. One of the benefits was this site hadn't been in grass forever. It was in corn just the year before, so the grass wasn't super well established, and we saw a really good response there. But right next door, where it was still in corn and nothing got seeded down, this is what it looks like before planting. We seeded this in. We were like, oh, the site prep's already done, so we'll put in some wildflower mix on this site. Got a really nice response from that for a couple years. 2019, we can start to see our stems popping up. And then 2022, this is what it looked like. So pretty different in terms of the response there. And we tried to walk through this last summer, and this is what it looks like inside. So like total cover, our understory has completely changed. The trees are obviously still really young and like have a lot of growing to do, but we're getting full shade on this site. So a time check here, using site prep methods where hopefully if we have seeds nearby that are gonna drop into the site, we're getting kind of these cornfield conditions. 4 years after planting, this is what we're looking at. Full shade, trees are still growing, but we're getting a lot of different goals out of this project. Spot spraying, a couple years after planting, we can see canopy closure is going to happen. We're seeing some diversity in the herbaceous layer. Some changes are happening. We feel like, we're meeting our goals there. Walk away, don't do anything. 12 years later, we've got really beautiful trees. This is a super successful project. These sites are all meeting restoration goals. It just comes down to what those goals are. So we're going to have canopy closure here, and probably the next couple years, our grass layer is going to start to drop out, and then we're going to see more of that herbaceous diversity come in. It's just a question of timeline and when we want that to happen. I think that's it. Questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on, Jess. Just let me give you a microphone so everybody can hear.
Thanks so much for your great work. It's so great to see the herbaceous layer. I feel like for so long it was neglected, and it's a critical piece. Just one question is, did any of your partners get any data on the pre-application, post-application of the soil phosphorus concentrations and how many years it took for potentially those chemicals to degrade or where they moved?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a level of monitoring I can say we haven't been able to do at this point. Chris and I talk about that routinely, that we're built for implementation, and our staff is pretty small. So definitely, Shawn and I have been talking about opportunities for collaborating on monitoring in the future and what the needs are there. So really appreciate the question. I think it bears more thought, but at our current capacity, it's not something we've been able to do.
Hold on. I'm going to go ahead and back here.
Any parsnip? Mm-hmm.
I did some treatments on some areas, and we sprayed them, we didn't plant them. And the following year, they were completely filled with parsnips.
Mm-hmm.
Just one or two plants that seeded that whole area that we applied. So, just a question, those parsnips didn't really show up in your images there.
Yeah, maybe I can give an update in another couple years. There's a project that I did some prep on last year that I know has parsnip, and we seeded it with a wildflower mix, and I'm going to put a cover crop down this spring, so I'm hoping that's going to help. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, with any sort of site prep, it's a concern of what are you going to release onto this site, and yeah, is it going to be worse than what was there? So far, we haven't found that to be the case, but.
What are the herbicides being applied?
Currently, we're just using glyphosate. For some of these projects, we've also mixed in a pre-emergent, which is what really makes cornfields magical, is there's a pre-emergent in the soil that keeps annual weeds from germinating. What we've used is pendimethalin. It's not super fun to apply, so we've limited that, but it has really, really wonderful restoration results, like a one-time application, the benefit that you get from it. Mm-hmm. Yep, Rodeo or now Roundup Custom is the only thing that we apply. Yeah, I think we'd all like to know the answer to that, Will.
Did everyone hear the question? So basically, if there's invasive species that are coming in, if I understand this right, that it might not make any difference whether you're doing the site prep. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just in general, if you had any thoughts about, balancing, how do you do site prep when you have invasive species, and then post-planting maintenance, how does that change your approach?
Yeah, I mean,
just how aggressive it, yeah.
Right. It's definitely a case-by-case basis, and Phil spoke to some of that with the invasives and what we see in CREP projects. And yeah, if you have knotweed, it's not a one-and-done situation. Same as reed canary grass. We're trying to cobble together funding to have 3 to 5 years of treatment there, and those resources aren't always there. So there are some projects that we have to say, no, this isn't going to be a good use of our funds because we can't keep up with it. So I don't know, I guess that's my best answer, is kind of being judicious with what you take on and knowing how long you're going to have to keep hands on it.
Any other questions? I have just one really quick. If you are, like you said that it really depends on the site. That you know, if a site's been in reed canary grass for only a couple of years, then that's, you know, you've got the seeds in the soil that can pop up. But I would imagine that in some cases you don't really know how long what the history of the site is. And have you developed any kind of feel for whether it's going to be successful or not? I mean, it sounds like sometimes you do the herbicide treatment and you don't get the natural regen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we haven't done a project yet. We've definitely done some where it's like, ooh, what's going to come out of the seed bank here? What are we, going to release back onto the site? I don't think we've done a project yet where we've seen that it was detrimental, like having that reduced competition. Generally is worth it, and giving the trees, then they have that chance to outcompete whatever comes in. But in terms of, was your question about reed canary and kind of how... Right. Right. Yeah, it's been, I don't think we really know how to predict that, honestly. But I would say that, reed canary grass aside, the wet sites tend to do better. I think the seed bank is longer lived in terms of native species there. So some of those reed canary sites, we treat them, and it's like the response that you get from natives is really tremendous. The reed canary is not gone, it's still there, but you're changing it a little and reducing the competition. Thanks.
Oh, do you have another question?
So sorry if I missed this early in your presentation, but I'm just wondering, why you're seeing higher regeneration rates for the cornfields, because that's kind of the opposite of what I would have expected, and maybe it's because cornfields are so heavily sprayed, it's already kind of a sterile environment, so the plants can just grow faster. But wouldn't they also be more compacted with heavy machinery use, or?
Yep, that's a good question, especially in terms of species seeding in, I think, and establishing from seed. I think they can handle that compaction a little bit better. But yeah, in terms of why those sites do so well, it's exactly what you said, that it is kind of a sterile environment. There's been treatment going on for so long to keep weeds at bay. Mm-hmm. And you have some of that, if they've been using the pre-emergent that suppresses annual weeds, you have some of that residual the first year often, mm-hmm. that keeps the weeds down, but that doesn't affect tree species. So, it's a really enriched site often that, it's gotten a lot of manure or fertilizer applications, and we see those trees just shoot up incredibly fast in those conditions.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another one. Oh. Go.
Did you say fire?
That's what they do for prairie restoration often.
Right.
Yeah.
Has anybody in the room used fire? Yeah? Cool. Okay. Yeah. No, I guess from our program standpoint, so far we haven't. Just working on private land and getting someone to agree to let us set something on fire is not something we've gone to yet, but I see Ryan raising his hand back there. Right. Okay, thanks everyone.
We have another second microphone. Oh, it's right there. Okay, so of course we can't do any of this work without the trees, we really like to get ideally trees that are locally grown, that have a local genotype, that have and be using trees that have genetic diversity, so we're not just planting clones. And the Intervale Conservation Nursery has been one of our, I think for a lot of us, one of the main sources of those trees. There are also lots of other nurseries that grow natives and several that are starting up. And I think we've got a few people here today that are starting new nurseries so that we can increase that supply of native local trees and shrubs. The Intervale also has a planting crew that does a lot of the actual planting work and some of that site maintenance, so doing string trimming around trees after planting to help, if in cases where we're not spot spraying, to help those trees have a chance, in the first couple of years, see if they can get above that herbaceous layer and improve the survivorship that way. So I thought it would be interesting to find out what's happening at the Intervale and at other nurseries. And Mandy Fisher and Ben Rogers are here to talk to us about, to give us an update on Intervale. And hopefully we'll talk also a little bit about the other nurseries. There you guys are. I was looking back over there. So Mandy is the Director of Programs at the Intervale Center, and Ben Rogers is maybe a new face that you are all going to want to get to know. He's the Sales Manager at the Intervale. So welcome to Mandy and Ben.
Thanks, Shawn. I'm Mandy Fisher, Director of Programs at the Intervale Center. I've been at the center for 18 years, and I've had a lot of different roles there. Where's Katie? Katie, it was so exciting to see Annalise and Leah's work through our partnership with Fish and Wildlife, revisiting it and also seeing the continued growth of that work is just so powerful, and thank you for being such an awesome partner to us at US Fish and Wildlife. We really appreciate all your support over the decades. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ben Rogers, and I'm the sales manager for the nursery. I'm new here, and my role is really to work with you to help your projects come to life and sell trees, and working with our team to create nursery targets. And so I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you in person today.
So I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to the Intervale Center and the Intervale Conservation Nursery for folks who may not know us, and then we're going to give you a sales update, talk a little bit about flooding, and then we have a couple other nursery folks who are going to come up and give little updates on how they're doing as well. So the Intervale Conservation Nursery is a program of the Intervale Center that's been around since 2001. I don't think it's an accident that that's right around the same time that the CREP program started. And we grow native trees and shrubs for conservation projects across Vermont. The Intervale Center's mission is to strengthen community food systems that sustain farms, land, and people. We manage the Burlington's Intervale, where there's a field trip today with Audubon, Vermont, to see some work we've been doing together around bird-friendly habitat. So if you haven't been to the Intervale, please go down on that field trip. And we also are a statewide leader on farm business assistance, developing markets for farm products, and increasing food security. So why trees, though? And actually, this might be hard to believe for people who know us in the food system space, but the nursery is actually our biggest program. And we grow trees because healthy riparian forests underpin a healthy food system. It all starts with soil, water, and habitats. And we're all over this meeting. Brooke, the seed coordinator, will be doing an update and also leading a roundtable later. Like I said, you can go to the Intervale Center this afternoon, and we're really excited to showcase our work throughout the day. In the last 10 years together, we've planted 350,000 stems from the Intervale Center all over the state. And I just want to say thank you so much to all of our partners here for helping make that happen. We really, really appreciated it. Our nursery, as Shawn was saying, our nursery also sells services like planting services and invasive management services. And this year we have added the capacity to do selective pesticide application as part of our invasive species toolkit and our site prep toolkit. And we're also working on some new product lines. Those include native tree starts, perennial plugs, and seeds. If you're interested in any of these products, please talk to Ben or anyone at the Conservation Nursery. They're back there. or me. I also want to give a shout out to NorthWoods. I see you guys up here. I love you, NorthWoods. Working really closely with us on seed project. So as most of you know, our business is in a floodplain along the Winooski River, and we did experience some pretty significant flooding and damage in 2023. And we lost a lot of young seedlings, but we were able to access resources through Lake Champlain Basin Program and some other funders to help do some replanting of the stock we lost. And we're not sure what the impact of those losses will be, because those trees need to grow and mature. It'll take a couple of years, but I want to reassure everyone that there's no impact to this year's stock, and there'll likely be no impact to next year's stock either. And moving forward, we're going to continue to work on managing our climate-related risk. We work with farms all over the state doing climate risk management, and it's no different for our conservation nursery. A big part of that's improving our mortality numbers on site, which we're working on mostly by trying to reduce deer browse so that our plants can grow big and healthy. It also means that we use resale stock from Coldstream as a tool to kind of manage those ebbs and flows. We're diversifying our product line, and we're working with other nurseries really closely to help fill gaps in the market. When weather affects one of us, it's not going to affect all of us, hopefully, at the same time. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
So I'm going to just give a quick update about how we're doing sales-wise. I kind of hopped in right in the heat of the season, and I've gotten a chance to talk to a lot of you about the different trees you need. And yeah, so we've been making a lot of plans this year to really scale up our production, and we've been making investments as far as we have a new greenhouse that we're using to propagate a lot more stems this year. We have a new tree lifter that we're using in our fields to improve the way that we harvest our trees. This year, we're going to be adding deer fencing, and we're buying a cultivating tractor to address some of those mortality challenges. And we're hoping to secure funding for a new live inventory system to really improve the way that you all can order trees and we can process your orders more effectively. With all that being said, we're really moving towards a goal of being able to provide between 50 and 70,000 trees each year for projects across the state. And these numbers are coming from the information that we've been hearing from you through conversations and different surveys about what the need for native trees are throughout the state for all these projects. And that's why we've been really doubling down and encouraging a lot of folks to start up these different native plant nurseries so that we can work in collaboration to diversify the market. And with all that being said, we are undersold for the season, and we still have a significant inventory to sell. So far we've sold about 11,000 stems from our own field and through the Coldstream resale order, whereas we've projected to sell around just under 19,000 stems. So with that being said, we still have a lot of stems that are for sale. So if you're interested, please reach out. We have thousands of silky and red osier dogwood available, as well as many shrub willow and hundreds of species like American elm, black willow, silver maple, choke cherry, silver maple, high bush cranberry, eastern cottonwood, gray birch, sycamore, tamarack, and then plenty of bio material like live stakes and fascines, and container stock as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you all and learning more about how the Intervale Center can support your projects.
Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about our sales issues. I think we're seeing this as part of a larger trend. Our bare root sales have been stagnant for the last 5 years, regardless of what we have available. We missed our projected sales target last year, and we're going to miss it again this year likely. This is really difficult for a small organization to absorb, and it's also just not in line with what we've been hearing from partners. And also from leaders around the state about more and more money coming down the pipeline for water quality initiatives. And it's also just not in line with our desire to grow and plant more trees. So for some reason, what we're hearing and what we're experiencing are just not matching up. One theory that I have for this year is actually about just the community in general, planting fewer trees post-flood. Post-Irene, we experienced a pretty significant sales slump that took a couple years to recover from. And so that's a conversation I'm really interested in having with our partners. If you're planting if you're doing smaller projects and fewer projects because of energy that got diverted post-flooding this summer. And then we can think about that as we have these flood events. How do we keep the market stable, and how do we, adjust our sales projections and what we have available based on flooding year to year? Ultimately, the solution here is about communication. We need to plan 2 or 3 years in advance to have the stock that you need, and we need to make our sales projections 6 to 10 months in advance of when you place your orders. So the more open and continuous conversations we have, and the more advanced planning we do, whether that's contract growing, whether that's planning more on a watershed basis or even a community, scale basis over multiple years, those things will really help us and help the nursery community.
So with that said, we are really curious about how we can help you get more trees this year, and hoping just to hear from you this afternoon. But there are a handful of other nurseries that are here, and we'd love to give them the chance to kind of give us an update. And so first, I'd like to welcome Kiana from the Oswald River Association.
Hi, folks. I'm Kiana French. I work for the Oswald River Association. I think I've worked with a lot of you during my time at the Intervale Conservation Nursery for the last 3 years, so thank you for that. We are starting a nursery in Lake Placid, New York. We do a lot of work in the Oswald River Watershed, which is a part of, starts up in the mountains and runs all the way into the Lake Champlain Valley. And so the first 2 years of our project we're going to be building the nursery and starting to scale up. So first 2 years, our goals are to have 20,000 stems for use for our project within our organization. And then moving from there, the next year 3, 4, 5 are really going to be scaling up. And our goal is to reach 65,000 stems by year 5. We're focusing on native woody tree and shrub species, riparian, and going to be starting with 5 to begin with and then growing from there. So that's kind of where we're at. We're at the beginning of the project, and I'm excited to work with you all in a new capacity.
Thanks, Kiana. We also have Spencer from the farm upstream.
Hello, I'm Spencer Hardy. I'm one of the co-owners of the farm upstream. We're a pretty new vegetable farm in Jericho, Vermont, and are in sort of the second pilot year of a native plant nursery. I'm coming from a pollinator research background, so we're going to start with primarily pollinator shrubs, because it seems like there's some demand there, and there's some fun species that I don't see in other listings that I think I'm going to try and offer in the first few years. This year will probably be retail focused through our farm stand, but I'm looking to expand into some more wholesale contract growing as the demand is there. Things like prickly ash and serviceberry and winterberry holly, flowering shrubs that have pollinator value and maybe can be added to some of these larger riparian plantings, as well as some dogwoods and willows and some of the classic staples.
We've got Ellen from MRBA Nursery.
I'm Lindsay with the Missisquoi River Basin Association, masquerading as Ellen. We also received some funds to start up a nursery in our region. Super excited to be doing that. As I'm sure all of you have experienced, projects don't always go as smoothly as you expect, so we're hitting some stumbling blocks, but expect to be planting trees as soon as this fall and hopefully have stock available for harvest by 2026. We're mostly really excited to be a part of the network of growing nurseries and super appreciative of the support from Intervale, from NorthWoods. We're just very excited about the resilience that's going to come out of this smaller shepherding of localized operations. So happy to be in this room with you guys. Again, happy to have this wonderful flagship support that we receive from Intervale, and looking forward to the future.
We've got David from Verterra Nursery.
Hi, my name's David. I am co-owner of Verterra Nursery. We are a very small startup, conservation nursery, trees and shrubs, native, bare root. We have gotten an amazing opportunity through Lake Champlain Basin and New Epic to help found the nursery and get things running. And we are just getting going this year. We have our greenhouse up and running, and we're planting dormant cuttings, mostly riparian species right now. But we're very interested in diversifying and really having as broad an availability and lineup as possible. So very interested to talk to you guys and see what species are maybe not as available as you would like. We're really interested in kind of fulfilling the need that is out there. So we're really excited. We're just barely getting going. We should have plants in the ground this year, and hopefully be ready to harvest either end of this year, next year, and yeah, we're just hitting the ground now. So really excited to talk to you guys, get into this community. I have a background in growing plants at Horsford's Gardens and Nursery. So I might know some people from landscaping and retail, but this is kind of new and following a passion to get into the conservation world. And so really excited about that, and really excited to chat with some of you guys and further this good work. So thanks.
Well, that's it for us. I don't know if anyone has any questions for the Intervale team. Cool. Well, oh, one question. Oh, yeah. Sadie is going to come up from, I need a reminder of the organization, Champlain Valley Nursery.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sadie with the Champlain Valley Native Plant Restoration Nursery, and that is run by the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District. And we originally began, I believe, in 2002 with the Nature Conservancy. See Murray back there. He was a big star at that. And we are a small nursery located in Poultney, Vermont. And we tend to have like 3,000 to 4,000 plants available, both bare root and potted stock. For this spring, we are fairly low or sold out of most of our bare root plants. And I see a few organizations who have bought from us, so thank you for your support. And I guess one of our updates is we're working on increasing our capacity, our production capacity. So hopefully we'll be having more plants available for you guys in the future.
Any other nurseries? Cool. Well, thank you all. Oh, another one. All right.
Hi, I'm Lillian Corbin. I'm with the Essex County Conservation District, and we have a conservation nursery that's, I think it's been going for like 10 to 12 years, but it's a pretty hands-off production. So right now we don't have much of a stock, but hopefully by next year we'll have more, but we mainly focus with like silver maples and other riparian plantings. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. I'm like not.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to chat the rest of this afternoon and learn a little bit more about what the need is for all of your projects. And I'm excited to meet you all too. So if we've communicated over email, feel free to come say hello. And if not, also feel free to come say hello. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mandy. So I just want to put in an extra plug for the Nursery Roundtable discussion this afternoon after lunch. For those of you who aren't going on the field trip, it's not just for people who are actively involved in production. I'm sure that they'll, be really great to have the input from watershed groups and conservation districts and other planters in terms of what species you're interested in, and just being part of that conversation. So in general, it will be just about how we can all work together to streamline the nursery production, make sure that we're getting the species that people want, and how we can all support the nurseries and how the nurseries can support each other. So I think it'll be a really great conversation. So I encourage anyone who's interested in any of that to join us then. We've got another break now, so you get to go back and talk to each other, continue that conversation that you'd had earlier. And if you could, I think it's 11:26 now. And I think we don't need to be back till 11:40. So it's got a bit of a break. So yes, at 11:40 we'll be back to talk about seed collection and native seed collection. All right, thanks. It's 11:40. So we're going to sit, if everyone would sit back down. Thank you. Once again, I'm so sorry to break up the conversation. Okay. Thank you. So ideally, the trees that we're planting are of local, or sourced locally, meaning that somebody goes out and collects seeds from local sources, and those get grown up, and we use those trees for our restoration work. A lot of times, we're having to source trees from out of state, from Michigan, for example. And it'd be really great if we can have the majority of the trees that we use be of local genotype, and that we are also making sure that we have lots of genetic diversity, that those trees aren't, we're not just using one tree for the source of those seeds. And so, like the Intervale Nursery grows a lot of their stock from seeds, and we're hoping that we can promote that with other nurseries as well. And in addition to the nursery growing or production of the bare root trees that we use in a lot of our restoration work, there are lots of direct seeding trials going on to see if it makes sense, instead of planting the bare root trees, if it might be more cost effective if we do a little bit of site prep work and then just cast a collection of native seeds, and whether that might be a good way to do these projects. And there's two of us have done some of this, pioneering work in terms of collecting seeds. This is not done everywhere, by the way. This is, they're having to figure this out pretty much de novo. We've got Jess Colby, who is the Riparian Lands Project Coordinator, and Brooke Fleischman, who is the Conservation Seed Coordinator at the Intervale. So, and Jess is at NorthWoods Stewardship Center, and they'll be talking about their efforts to collect seeds, the challenges that you face, and how we can all work together on seed collection. So I'll turn it over to Jess and Brooke.
Hi, everyone. Like Shawn said, I'm Brooke Fleischman. I'm the statewide seed coordinator of Vermont, and I coordinate the Riparian Lands Native Seed Partnership that is an emerging partnership as of the last couple of years.
And I'm Jess Colby. I'm the Riparian Lands Project Coordinator for NorthWoods Stewardship Center. I host a crew during the field season to do a lot of this work on collecting seeds.
So today we're going to give a pretty quick introduction. If you want any more project background and how we got here, we'll have a link at the end for our newsletter that goes a lot more into depth, or we presented at the FEMC conference in December that gives a little bit more background as well. So just look out for those things. But today we really want to focus on some of our strategic planning outcomes from a meeting that we had this January, and a little bit of an outlook for this upcoming year, as well as how can we get involved with more people? How can you all help us make this happen?
Just wanted to preface this by saying that this work wouldn't be possible without the financial support of the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So shout out to all of you guys. You are awesome.
And so this is our team. Obviously, there's me up on the left, and then this year at the Intervale Center, we'll have our first seed collection crew. They're starting next week, and they'll run through the end of June to kind of help with our busy spring collection season.
And my Riparian Lands crew started this week. They're sitting right here in the front, if you guys want to stand up real quick. We have Alex and Jake. So if you have any questions, also feel free to search them out too. They know a lot of this too.
And so here we'll talk about a lot of our strategic planning outcomes now. We had partners come together this January to talk about where do we want this partnership to go and what kind of steps do we need to take in order to get there.
So during this meeting, we brainstormed a purpose vision statement. And so I'll just read it out real quick to you guys. The purpose of this project is to develop a statewide partnership of organizations that work together to meet the need for local native tree and shrub seeds for restoration projects that support climate mitigation, water quality, and healthy habitats.
And we will accomplish this by leading in best practices, enhancing partnerships, and providing opportunities for information and labor sharing, continuing our seed map development, as well as planning for expansion. And we'll go into more detail to each one of those right now.
So through our work in enhancing our general partnerships, we've been engaging with a lot of organizations, a lot of them here in this room right now, and individuals at both local and regional scales who are engaged in native seed work or who are hoping to get into doing this type of work in order to raise our capacity as a whole within the restoration community. So I think the next slide is our map. So this is just our very broad scale regional view of where we've been reaching out to people. So a lot of those green trees, those are a lot of the nurseries. They are in New York, they're in Vermont, New Hampshire, and then we have a bunch of other organizations. Those could be nonprofits, those could be federal groups who aren't necessarily in our Riparian Lands Native Seed Partnership group, but are very active in giving us information. And those are in Canada, those are in Maine, those are in Massachusetts, and we've also, not shown on this map, is been reaching out to the folks at the USDA in Ames, Iowa. They're in charge of doing a germplasm unit out there, and so they do a lot of storage of woody material. So they've given us a lot of information on how to better store our seeds. Yeah.
And so in 2023, it was my first year as the statewide seed coordinator, and it was really meant to gather information, make those connections with partners, and get some initial examinations of what the demand for native seed is in the state. So here, this year, we're increasing some of that partnership by information and labor sharing opportunities, specifically with local nurseries who are established and some of the startup nurseries as well. So this is a very experimental next step in gathering more information on how to build the partnership. We're really still figuring out what works, what doesn't, and so as you can probably assume, increased capacity for us equals more seeds equal more growing capacity for nurseries, and more growing for nurseries equals more trees for restoration. And so a lot of these conversations have started among 10 nurseries so far.
So our next little thing that came out of the capacity, out of our strategic planning meeting, was development of our seed map and phenology tracking. This is probably one of the biggest areas of capacity blocking that we run into. So we're hoping to utilize the support of local universities, organizations, and citizen scientists through a couple of different means. So this is our current map of where we have locations of seed collection, or just really good dense populations of trees and shrubs that we are interested in. Most of that is localized around Burlington area, where Brooke is based, and the Northeast Kingdom, where the Riparian Lands Crew and NorthWoods is. We have some that's more down towards Poultney because of TNC, but the rest of the state is pretty barren. So we're looking to try to fill in some of those gaps in order to try to figure out new sites for collection, and in order to gain more genetic diversity in our seeds. So one of the ways that you guys, actually, were you going to talk about this?
Yeah.
I'm getting rolling.
We're doing this by a Survey 123 form. This is something that we've developed in the last few weeks. This is directly linked to our statewide seed sourcing map, and it helps us track phenology data and specific site locations for potential collection sites. So any support, if you want to scan the QR code or use any of that information available, feel free to do so.
And then our other avenue is we have collaborated with Vermont Center for Eco Studies in order to create a phenology tracking iNaturalist page. And so it's collected a bunch of points that were already in the iNaturalist website, and we're looking to potentially do some annotations to a lot of the old points that are already there. So a lot of photos, you can decide whether or not they're female trees or good seeding locations just based off of the photo. So we'll probably be trying to pick away at that this year into the next few years. And then also adding new points that include phenology data. So that's just another avenue.
Mm-hmm. And then this is just to give a sense for anyone who may not be familiar with what the general phenological timeline is coming up. This is what you're going to see first when you're out on the landscape. For those dioecious species, you're going to see separate individuals of male and females. So males will usually flower first, and then females will follow. And then also followed by seeding time. So this is just to give you a general sense when you're out walking around doing the great work that you all do already. And then this other part of our strategic planning process is thinking long-term as well. So like I said, we're really in an information gathering phase, but we are really looking into what the potential is for a seed cooperative and what that would look like to have more organizations involved in an overall sourcing, monitoring, and storage cooperative.
And we're also thinking very large-scale infrastructure. Currently, our storage facility is split between multiple locations. We have like a commercial fridge, we've got walk-in cooler at Intervale, but it would be really nice to try to figure out if it makes sense to have a large-scale collection, monitoring, processing, storing, and distribution like center here in Vermont, whether that's located centrally in Vermont, if it's on one side of the state, I don't know. But we're gonna be thinking about how to do that assessment and whether it's needed, so stay tuned for that.
And then just to give you an idea of what some of our targets are pertaining to seed collection this year, in 2023, we collected about 165 pounds of seed, and this year's goal is 264 pounds of seed. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. And then we're also still working with Vermont Fish and Wildlife on the direct seeding trials. So there'll be another application in June, casting out another 8 million seeds at both current sites in Wolcott and Kain in Vermont. And then in the fall, we might have 2 potentially new sites to seed.
So what are the best ways for you all to help? Our 2 main things are using our Survey 123 form or the iNaturalist form and helping us network. Like we said before, the identification of new sites is probably the biggest consumption of time for this work. So we do have like some sites that we know produce seeds and that are good, but finding those new sites is invaluable. So that would be the best way for y'all to help. And then again, helping us network. So if you know of people who are interested in doing this work, definitely connect them with us.
And our presentation is full of QR codes. So this last one is a link to our newsletter that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. That'll just give you more background information on how we started and where we got to this point now. But with that, thank you, everybody. That is all that we have.
Are those QR codes, like, if we go to the NorthWoods website, or, I mean, like, or can we get a URL there to those?
Yeah, I can share links as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just because, so that, since they went by fast. But this is all going to, the whole meeting will be recorded, and I'll post that on the Watershed Forestry Partnership webpage as well. So if there's things that you missed, that should be up shortly after the meeting. Any questions about seed collection or how? Yeah. John, do you want that? You've got a big voice too.
Have you considered using any middle school students as collection agencies?
A little bit. I don't know, have you been doing any talking?
Not in depth at this point. We've started talking to some high schools and like UVM in general, but nothing younger than like 15. Not that we're like cutting that off at that point, but yeah, not currently.
Can you just give some brief points of when you're talking about getting new sites, what are the things you're looking for people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So For seed collection, we really need to obviously be able to collect it. So when we're looking at a site for seed collection, it's usually edge habitat or like a buffer of some point, so that you'll be seeing branches that are growing a little bit lower than they would in like a dense forest. So like access areas, trails, and like even if you're kayaking on a pond or a river and you have some overhanging branches, that really helps a lot. We have ladders and pole pruners that we use, but we really can't get up, past 30 feet or so. So I think that's the biggest thing, but also like being able to make sure you're in a riparian area, obviously, so that they're adapted to those kind of habitats. Do you have any additional?
I was going to say, one of the things I don't think either one of us mentioned, right now we're working under a state license, so we have access to state lands, so that's where we've focused a lot of our attention, is just going out to each of the state properties and trying to find a lot of the things that Brooke was saying, low branches, species that we're looking for, riparian species. We're also looking for things that are kind of growing in denser clusters, especially if we're going to have more than just a couple of people out collecting. Like those would be good if we're going to have like a volunteer day, or like you had mentioned, middle school groups, like having a site that we can go to and be like, there's going to be enough work for everyone to kind of do this together. That would probably be the only other things that I would say.
And making sure that if you're picking out a site that's on like private land, that make sure we have that contact information so that we have allowance to actually be on that land. That's also a big part of it as well.
Have you all connected with Streamwise, with Lauren Janess? Because I think she's, leading a small army of folks out looking at healthy riparian buffers, and that seems like a great opportunity for you to identify potential collection sites. If, as we're migrating our assessment tool from Fulcrum to Survey 123, maybe we want to think about adding in a question of whether the landowner is interested in being part of the seed collection network. Would that work with your program?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Lauren and I have talked about other things, but not Streamwise before. So yeah, that's a great opportunity, I think, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If I can just ask one other question regarding the phenology data collection. For those of us who maybe aren't as familiar with tree species identification, like I noticed in the Survey 123, there's a lot of details, like what type of alder it is or whatever. And personally, I would not necessarily know that. So what's our best option for sharing information with you if we don't know the species? Like, is it iNaturalist? Is it, or for people who may be interested in our communities, like could we share a front porch forum post saying, hey, we really are interested in learning more about when your seeds are, or when your trees are flowering, go to this link? Like, what would that be?
Right. Yeah, I think a good first step is iNaturalist, because that can be verified by other users as well with identifying things. But are kind of trying to get a sense of that interest of ID help as well, because if there's enough people interested, we could set up a sort of training with that as well to know what to look for, especially with identifying flowers and the separate like dioecious male and female individuals as well. So that's also an opportunity.
Do you have a specific list of species that you're looking for that you're struggling to find, and is that available someplace?
Yeah, if you take a look at our newsletter, it has the list of all the species that we're interested in. Sorry, I should have kept this up longer, I guess. Yeah, it has all the species we're interested in. But I would say top 3 would be like silver maple, nannyberry, what was the other one? Balsam poplar for this year. We're trying to find more sites for, so.
Hey, thanks so much. Really great presentation. I presented this morning on the funding opportunity, so I'm coming from that perspective, and I assume, like everyone else in the country, funding is never enough, capacity is never enough. The comment about middle school students and like getting folks out in the field, whether they're middle school, high school, volunteers, it made me think of another conference that I was at on Saturday where a very similar question was asked regarding like bird sampling and like getting data about bird species. And I just wanted to comment on this quick. So when it comes to the funding, like the data that you're gathering, the partnerships that you're building, and like the public education benefits are so important. But I also just wanted to plant the seed, I guess, pun intended, that the volunteer or the student like education time can also count as match. So like if, and this is for anyone, if you're going after a grant like the Futures Fund that I talked about, where they're making you bring in 50% match, that time that you're getting from the volunteers or the students to collect the seeds could also count towards the overall match on your grant, which helps chop away at the cash that you would need to bring to the table. So I don't know if that's super relevant at this point, but just down the line, I'd encourage you to think about that because people have had a really hard time coming up with the match requirements.
Sweet, thank you.
I think Jess has a question over in the corner.
Are you at all working with species that we're losing right now, like the ash and the beech, and what's your perspective? I'm sure you're having conversations with people about that.
We are having conversations about that. We are really interested in getting into species of concern like ash and elm, but our storage space is really meant for like short-term storage, and since nurseries and people aren't really looking to like propagate those species at this point or grow them out, at least with the people that we've talked to, we're thinking more like long-term storage, genetic viability storage. So we're trying to see who we can partner with to like get those genetics shipped for long-term storage, because right now our coolers are so humid, like it's so humid that they should be raining in there. But so it just isn't like something that would be long-term right now.
I have another question. We've talked about this a little bit. If groups want to have seeds for their own projects, right now I know that you're not wanting to be a retail seed producer, but I think we've talked a little bit about if within a partnership that might, if we kind of get this together, that if partners help with phenology data collection, that they might have access to some seeds in return. Is that true?
That is what the labor exchange is right now. That's why we're working with nurseries specifically, because they're the ones that need the seeds most directly. And in the scale of like how much seed we're collecting, nurseries don't really need that much compared to like the direct seeding trials that take millions and millions of seed. Nurseries need like maybe a couple thousand. So that is something we're trialing this year to kind of see what the analysis on like cost of production versus like the actual labor that goes into collecting seeds and what works overall, like to get that overall supply ready for everyone who would want to use it. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Thanks. This is more of a comment than a question, but so the Klamath dam removal out in California, it's the largest dam removal in U.S. history. They're collecting 1 billion tree seeds to reseed the area that's going to be exposed as part of that. And so I just want to highlight that there's actually maybe a different opportunity, a different avenue to go with this, which is any time you're doing any earthwork, berm removal, that kind of thing, you're going to have to do seeding anyway. There may be an opportunity to incorporate tree seeds into that. Often you'll do planting on top of that. But anyway, this might be another strategy just to want to plant the seed again.
Thanks, Will.
Planting a lot of seeds here. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I think before we break for lunch, we had another announcement that Mary Beth, there she is, wants to make. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jess.
I'll be quick because I know the lunch smells really good. I'm Mary Beth Poley. This is Karina Daly, and we're both on the board for the Vermont Association for Wetland Science. We're a new nonprofit. Have our second annual meeting on Friday. Registration's closed for this one, but we'll have at least 2 field meetings this coming year. I see a lot of members in here already, speakers at some of our events, and just wanted to get the word out. Feel free to talk to me or Karina if you want to learn more. And our events are now open to non-members, so would love to see you. Thanks.
Looking forward to advancing wetland science in Vermont.
Yeah, thanks.
Just a couple more things before we break for lunch. A reminder that the bus will be leaving at 1 o'clock down at the Davis Center for those of you who want to go on the field trip. Oh shoot! Now I forgot what else I was going to say. The field trip will get back before the afternoon session that starts at 3. So the field trip should get back around 2:45, so you'll have time to have a little bit of a break before the afternoon session starts at 3. I'm going to have the twig quiz going during lunch, so you can do that while you're eating. And it seems like there was one other thing I wanted to remind everyone, and it's gone. Okay, so anyway, enjoy lunch, and hopefully we'll have a lot of time to continue all those conversations. The bus leaves at 1, and the nursery roundtable discussion starts at 1:15. And it happens down the hall. So this room, we have to vacate this room now, so you want to take all your stuff. And if you want to leave it in either the Jost room or the Chittenden room, that's where we'll be in the afternoon. Oh, lunch is in here. We've got the, I believe, isn't there lunch back there? Yes, okay. We've got lunch in the back there. Okay.